So, thank you all. It's wonderful to see you on the third day. Today, we've had two wonderful keynotes so far, and I think to round out the beginning of our third and last day of this year's WOLFcon, we will be having a panel of leaders throughout the community to talk about co-creation at scale and governing open source projects in a global community. So, joining me today on stage are Elena Colon Marrero, which I did practice, but I need more coffee. Archivist for the digital curation at the Bentley Historical Library in the University of Michigan, here to represent the Bit Curator Consortium, the newest project within the Open Library Foundation. We also have Damien Katz, Director of Technology from Villanova, speaking about his experience with the ViewFind project, and Sean Nicholson, Associate Dean for Digital Initiatives at Michigan State University, here to talk about his experience as on the Community Council for Folio. Just to get off, I would invite each of the panelists, if you could please describe a few words for people who may not know you or your project. Could you give us the elevator pitch?
Sure. So,
Damien, you mean, yeah, either grab or there you go.
all right. So I'm Damien Katz from Villanova, representing the ViewFind project. ViewFind is a very flexible discovery layer that you can use to bring together search results from multiple sources, provide a consistent user interface for your library services, and generally gain control of the search experience as you pull together resources from many silos. I've been working on ViewFind since 2009 and have seen it grow quite a bit since that time. Of course, it was started in 2007 by, among other people, Andrew Nagy, who's in this room. So thanks, Andrew, for giving me something to do. Since that time, it's been deployed in close to 200 libraries that I know of, and we have about 30 committers, not all active at the same time, but we keep growing. It's been great.
And Damien, ViewFind is distinctively international. Could you say a few words?
That is a good point. We have ViewFind installations on all the continents represented by WOLFcon attendees, and I'm really disappointed that nobody came here from Antarctica, because who am I going to pitch it to?
Thank you. Elena.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elena Colon-Marrero, and I'm a digital archivist at the University of Michigan, and I'm president of the Bit Curator Consortium, which is very happy to join OLF this year. The Bit Curator Consortium is a community of about 30 member institutions in the United States, Canada, and United Kingdom. And it's centered around digital preservation and centered around the Bit Curator environment, which is an Ubuntu-based environment that's pre-packaged with digital preservation tools to allow different museums, archives, libraries to start up their own digital forensics and digital preservation kind of workflows and systems. And we host workshops, our own forums, all around how to do digital preservation and digital forensics work.
Excellent.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those online. My name is Sean Nicholson. I'm the Associate Dean for Libraries at Michigan State University. I've been bopping around for a few years in special interest groups, lurking in some of the councils, and have just completed my first year on the Community Council for the Folio project. So clearly, I'm still learning. Folio has a distinguished history long before I started getting involved, but I look forward to addressing some of the questions that Tom has prepared for us. Folio, as large S, is over 300 installations as far as we know. I'd have to ask maybe Harry Complanian how many committers we have. I can't have that figure like Damien did.
I did ask Peter right before this, how many committers are there? He said, "Ooh, I don't know. Make something up and you're probably good."
342.
Oh, that might be a little high. Peter said, "Don't go above 200." Anyway. Okay, well, great. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. It's a pleasure to join you and ask you some questions today on your experience and perspectives for open source governance. So the first one is a challenge that we heard about yesterday from Rosalind Metz during her keynote, which is about sustaining engagement. So engagement sometimes is easy to initiate, but it's more challenging to sustain. How, in your experience, have you found, what are the most effective strategies for keeping contributors motivated and involved over time? Damien, you've got the longstanding, the most experience here, or the most tenure. Could you start?
Sure. So as far as keeping people engaged, I think there are several strategies. One is certainly having good communication channels. Have recurring events, things like annual conferences, weekly or monthly calls. If people know things are going on, they're more likely to engage with them. Another thing is to keep growing the community. Over the years of Viewfind, people have come and gone, and sometimes come and gone and come back. And there's always more activity when somebody is new, because then you have new needs that people can collaborate around, and you can get experienced people engaging with less experienced people and sharing knowledge. And, I've been doing this for 16 years now, but it's always new for somebody. And that really keeps the energy going.
For us at the BCC, this has been like a question that we've actually been grappling with, considering if an institution does have a digital archivist, it's one person. And so you usually have maybe one or a handful of people representing their institution within the BCC. And over the course of a decade, folks have essentially cycled through governance and other members and committees. We also, we have monthly community calls that are kind of responsive to what our community asks for topics, not just directly related to our environment, but also just other digital preservation concerns. And that also serves as a very good way for folks who have stepped away to kind of come back by like doing a quick presentation to a community call that then they can use for promotion purposes as well. And then we also kind of look towards like outside of our community. We do allow other members, other folks to kind of volunteer on committees, especially our forum, which is our virtual event. And that brings in a ton of folks from outside of our paid member communities to remain engaged, have a chance to present, ask questions. I think our highest engagement event is always the Great Questions session, where folks can ask any and all of their digital preservation questions to kind of just an audience of kind of like-minded folks. And sometimes we have an answer, sometimes we don't. And sometimes we're like, that's a really great question that we all need to try to solve together. And so those are like little ways that we try to foster engagement, both within our paid member community, but also the very vast number of institutions that just use the environment, but aren't paid members, and trying to keep them continually engaged.
Like the second Damien's advice to have active communication channels, and I think the Folio community certainly does a nice job of that. And maybe for new members, a little too much communication. It becomes a little overwhelming at some times. But a low entry barrier, ways to get active, things like the special interest groups, are ways for people to get involved. But also in Folio, at the local level, you don't have to get involved with the structural activities, but you can do testing. And Yogesh, I haven't seen around, but I think would second this. Please get involved with testing and helping advance the software. And the thing that's really struck me personally is what Peter Kropotkin, the 20th century ecologist, would say is mutual aid. And I've found the community just so supportive, and it's not competition, it's cooperation. And I think that's what's powerful and sustaining for our members and wanting to come back with a shared purpose to solve a problem that we all see.
All right, thank you. So our next question is around governance and governance groups. So a governance group is central to how any successful and sustained project works over time, with the possible exception of Blacklight. How would you describe the role and structure of your project's governance group, and what makes it effective or challenging?
I can start. I'll start this one. Those of you that were here for the opening plenary, we heard pretty clearly centralizing humanity and finding a good way. I think that was, it's been really, I've been wrestling with that. What does that mean in juxtaposition to what we're seeing in the folio community? And then on the second day, we heard about trust. And we also heard about Blacklight, which Tom just mentioned. And it was mentioned in a sense that there was no governance. But I think I would beg to differ. For example, in the United Kingdom, they have no written constitution, but they certainly have long-standing governance. And so governance comes in lots of flavors. In Folio, we're very blessed from what I'm calling the originators. These people drafted lots of documentation for us to structure ourselves, hold ourselves accountable. We have three main councils. We have the special interest groups. And the councils have, through time, both lived up to the letter, but also the spirit of what was written in those foundational documents. And so there's some really effective governance happening in Folio, and we've heard through our time here also a willingness to adjust. And I think that's a real strength of governance, that it's flexible and realizes when it's time to make some changes. Just last year, the Community Council went through and did what was termed a light touch refresh of the governing document. And I think that was very helpful, but also affirming of the strengths of Folio's governance.
For the BIC Curator Consortium, our kind of governance model is centered around an executive council, which is made up of 7 members that are voted on by the voting rep for each member institution. And those 7 members, 3 are elected on an odd year, 4 are elected on an even year and serve 2-year terms, so that there's always kind of an overlap between our council. Within the council, we do self-nominate for treasurer and president-elect, and we vote who's going to be fill those roles within the council itself. But we are kind of there to create the strategic plan and drive our action plans, help our committees with whatever plans that they have to kind of drive and further the mission of the BCC. And then we even have a smaller subset of our executive council leadership team that kind of makes those smaller decisions in between our monthly larger meetings, because sometimes having to wait a whole month to be able to vote on just modifying a word in a document for us is a little bit too long, and our community is okay with our leadership team kind of taking the reins, especially for some of those more administrative tasks. Our community, again, is like, it's built on trust. They kind of vote us in, and they have fostered a whole lot of amount of trust in the executive council to kind of listen to the needs of both our kind of member communities and our wider community as a whole about like what the BCC needs and what it needs to continue on in the future. And so in 2024, we celebrated 10 years as a community. And so we're really looking forward to like continuing, but also re-looking at our governance structure in relation with OLF, because we're realizing maybe one of the weaknesses is that we do have complete turnover every 4 years and not really like permanent members for some of those more regular kind of administrative tasks. So we're also like, now that we're here and we're getting our feet under us, we're going to relook at like our governance structure and see like, does something need to be changed? Do things need to be tweaked to be able to kind of also fit the needs that OLF has for us as a community as well?
So I think there's not enough said in open source space about a governance model that I'd like to describe as the hubris governance model, wherein a single developer decides, I can do everything forever and it will never go wrong and I'll never need to be replaced and I'll never get tired. I think there are a number of projects run under this model, and I think perhaps prior to joining the Open Library Foundation, there was a certain element of this in Viewfind's governance. When I came to the project in 2009, I was unsure what my reception would be, and certainly prepared to be challenged a lot. But instead, I found the community really embraced me as a new leader and empowered me to do more or less whatever I wanted. I always asked, but the answer was always yes. And this led to a position where I was the authority on an awful lot of things. I had the keys to an awful lot of doors. And while I always had great support, and I don't say any of this to diminish the wonderful contributions of the global Viewfind community, I had too much power and too much responsibility. And so in coming to the Open Library Foundation and being forced to really talk about governance, that allowed us to bring together our project management committee representing different institutions in the Viewfind world, really figuring out where single points of failure were and distributing those further, getting a lot of help for me, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And I'll be honest, I probably still have a little too much power. And it's not by a desire to consolidate power, but more by a reluctance to ask other people to do things when I feel like I can probably do them myself and I don't like to trouble people. But this is another reason for governance. It takes the weight off of people who are overburdened, and it ensures that if something should change for those people, everyone else can go on. So I'm really grateful to the OLF for enforcing that structure on us to some extent. I'm grateful to all those who stepped up to help. And I, again, encourage you to think, if you're in any communities that are run on the hubris model of governance, get out of there before it's too late.
So, Sean, do you wanted to respond?
I wrote in my notes here, Damien, thank you for raising that. I wrote in my notes here, with low hierarchy, decision-making can be slowed by the need for broad consensus. Time zone, cultural, institutional differences can complicate coordination, and sometimes accountability becomes diffuse with no single entity being in charge. So I was struck by your comment of the hubris, but also even with a fairly robust governance structure that Folio brings, sometimes I think our keynote speaker yesterday worried about bureaucratization. And I don't think we're seeing that, but I do think we have to be more mindful of what the first keynote speaker said. There are some entities, some of our partners are not going to embrace some of this fundamental cultural things that the organization is trying to say. Like Folio is unabashedly open, but I was struck by the opening speaker's comments that there are some indigenous communities that by purpose want to hold things in their own narrow community, but still have Venn diagrams with the rest of us.
I wanted to just dwell on this notion of turnover as well and rotation. So Elena, I think one of the areas you described is Big Curator Consortium is trying to find the right balance of rotation. It takes a while for people to come up to speed. Sean, you've said that you've only been there for a year, right? You've been around for a while, but you've been in governance for a year. And Damien, I think one of your titles is Chair for Life, which is close. Is that it?
That may be it, yes.
That may be it. I read through the Viewfind documents. How do you think about what are the pros and cons of balancing turnover and rotation, that fresh blood, fresh energy and perspective with not wanting to lose experience and the knowledge capital that's built over time?
I'll start. One of the pros for us is that it also helps mitigate burnout, knowing that there's kind of a set time limit and then folks are rotating off and they are welcome to run again if they would like, but most folks do take some time between if they do choose to do that or not, or they might shift into being a chair of a committee instead. And one of the things that I kind of like recently noticed when we were doing a call for folks to run for executive councils, and I was looking at like the members who were in our meeting, I was like, oh, most of these folks have served on our executive council at some point in time. And so that allows for communication to be a bit easier, and knowing like some of the things that we're dealing with, some of the big questions that we're grappling with, and also in some ways kind of like fosters that trust that they know the types of conversations that we're having in the room because they've had those conversations too. And so like just one of the big unknowns for us is like, this is the first time where we're getting we have the ability to kind of manage our finances more directly, which then brings its own complications if your treasurer changes every year. And so those are like where now we're grappling of, okay, it does take a year for folks to get up to speed, and by the time they feel confident, they're rotating off. But in some ways that knowledge doesn't necessarily leave BCC, because those folks are still willing to serve as like consultants when we need to ask them questions. Like during this whole fiscal sponsor change for us, we had many one-on-one conversations with past executive council members just to get their knowledge of the organization, the history, the grounding, and documenting all of that too, so that it doesn't live in our heads. It's in documentation that we can pass on and we can give to the next person that they can use and make informed decisions for the next iteration.
So I think these issues are different also depending on the size and composition of the community and what you can realistically achieve. Historically, Viewfind was a Villanova project, and so a lot of Villanova-specific things crept into its administration, and we're still working on untangling some of those things. And I think when we finally complete that process and have, for example, all of our project-specific servers in the cloud instead of at Villanova, then that opens the door to more people taking on more roles and relieving the Villanova-specific responsibilities. But there's also the question of size of community and the level of engagement that community members are able to give. I've historically had a good chunk of my paid time devoted to the project, which has enabled me to do things that someone who has a much smaller slice just can't realistically be asked to do. So again, I'd love to not have as much responsibility and to find some people to take up the roles. And I do have people in mind who might be able to take on some of these things. We've also had good success in our project management committee when people roll off for one reason or another, having people waiting in the wings to fill those roles. So I think we have a good mix of more and less experienced people in governance at present, though there's always room to grow. But I think this all sort of also leads into a resourcing question, because in my mind, the ideal scenario is that the Viewfind project has a large enough budget that they can actually hire a person to do Viewfind administration as opposed to relying entirely on volunteerism. And, at the present moment, our budget doesn't make that even a realistic idea, but I think as a long-term goal, it's something to consider. Because there's only so much you can ask of volunteers. And if in the future we came to a situation where there wasn't enough volunteer effort to sustain governance, maybe that's the time to make a much stronger argument about funding to fill that gap. But in the meantime, I'm happy as being Viewfinder for life. Just, please don't kill me.
So that's a low bar, but but that's like maybe the key to happiness. Sean, would you like to say anything else on this?
No, I think it's
All right. So we've heard from both of our other keynote speakers this week about equity and inclusivity. Cindy Hull had a great statement, which is, of course, library resources are for everyone. Thinking about applying that to open source projects can you share a moment when your project had to rethink a process or a decision to better align with principles of equity and inclusivity?
So I'll go first this time. So this is something that happened many years ago when I was kind of on the periphery of the community. So apologies if I get some of the details slightly wrong. But in the digital preservation field, a lot of the tools that we use, a lot of the digital forensics tools that we use have been kind of developed for and by law enforcement agencies. And many years ago, one of our community members brought up the question of if we want folks to feel welcome and involved, why are we using tools that could perpetuate harm, especially in how we label certain metadata fields like evidence items? Like the things that we're getting in the archive aren't necessarily, I mean, depending on the type of archive you are, evidence items in the way that kind of law enforcement views it as. And so there was a conversation about, are there alternative tools that we can use? Can we change the way these metadata fields are labeled to more accurately reflect the values that we hold? And especially to not perpetuate harm in the work that we're doing. And so that was like a really active conversation that happened on our listservs. It got back to the developers of the environment, and it also got back to some of the developers for some of the open source tools that are packaged within the environment. And as a result of that, we were able to get some of those metadata terms changed to be more inclusive, to be more applicable to like libraries and archives instead of it being applicable to a police department. And we also were able to get in some ways kind of control over what individual institutions can name those things in the metadata of like the disk images that they're creating for their work. Because there is, with digital preservation, a bit of an inherent tension of also like surveillance, because you can get things off of materials that you might not have been intended for us to preserve and save. And so being able to apply care in what we're doing and recognizing like the tools that we use and where do they come from and how do they perpetuate or not harm was like a really kind of moment that I'm very proud that we had members of our community who felt comfortable enough to speak up about it and say like, I am uncomfortable with this and I am uncomfortable with this in the software, and that our developers were open to hearing that, having that conversation, and then trying to find a solution to that as well.
I don't know that there's one specific moment I would want to highlight. I think it's maybe more important to talk about the general principle that, to my mind, inclusivity is a feedback loop. You know, we're talking about growing communities and having people participate in governance. And obviously, the more people you have in your community, the more people you have who can help you. And therefore, inclusivity as a value is just a strategic must do. So I think the important thing is to listen to the members of your community, address these kinds of concerns. And if you do that well, then you get more members in your community who can help you address concerns and so forth. I mean, in terms of the ViewFind community, an early inclusive decision that was made was to internationalize the software so that it's, you know, the user interface supports many different languages. This means that developers who are not English speakers were drawn to the project and participated in it. And, you know, this international first thinking is hard to add later. But if you start with it, it really expands your scope. Similarly, accessibility was a principle of the project from early on. And we have had developers with disabilities participating in the project. Maybe they would have been less drawn to it if we had been less accommodating. And, you know, you can always do better. So as I say, constantly listen. But my point is, why would you not want to be inclusive? It makes people help you.
I took a similar approach to Damien, that I didn't want to highlight a specific example, but I will draw on the fundamental originating documents that identify all types of libraries and envisions other types of cultural heritage, making use of folio, so museums and archives. So that inclusivity stems from the very beginning. But on a more specific level, you may have heard through WOLFcon this time reference to a summit that took place in Washington, D.C. Back in the spring. And one of the things that was articulated in the inclusivity and equity perspective was we do have member organizations that are very large, well-resourced, and we have to constantly, vigilantly be on guard with our governance and just saying it out loud that we cannot allow these groups to dominate our activities. And it's as simple as, are they the ones that can afford to send people to conferences? Are they the ones that can afford to allow staff to participate? And we need these members, as Damien rightly said, but we just have to be vigilant about what that means for our governance, what it means for the activities that end up and the features that are developed. And the summit had several outcomes and some action items. Many of them are still being worked on, but reaching out to the people and institutions that are not yet quote unquote members, but are part of our community is it's going to be a concerted effort from the Community Council, and one I think that we should take great pride in.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest opportunity and or risk for open source library technology in the next few years?
Well, I think the keynote talk about trust is a very important piece, because there are so many reasons to undermine our trust, and I think we need to be very strategic going forward. You know, continue to be trustworthy and to trust each other, but also to be aware of the rise of outside forces that may challenge us. You know, we've seen over the past few weeks things like phishing attacks taking over NPM libraries and injecting malicious software into low-level dependencies. We have AI changing the landscape in strange and unpredictable ways. And so, you know, it's a careful balance that we have to make going forward. We are still the same people, we are still trustworthy, and we still work together well. And we should continue to build on the strengths that come from that. But we also have to be aware that in some ways we exist in a more hostile environment, and we need to defend against that so that our trust is not undermined by, you know, unfortunate circumstances we can't control. And I think all of our governance bodies should be thinking about that to some extent and making sure that our processes and workflows are robust enough to withstand, you know, maybe some things we'd rather not think about, but that really are happening to some projects.
So my answer is kind of based in what's happening in the digital preservation kind of community sphere, in that many of our digital preservation organizations, at least like here in the United States, are facing questions about financial sustainability. Can we still continue the way that we're organized and the way that we are? Especially in terms for the BCC, is how we only have 2 developers that are volunteers for our environment. And it's an environment that hundreds of museums and archives and libraries use as a part of their workflows. And what does it mean if that is no longer available, if those 2 people step away and no one's there to update it? And so a question that we've been grappling with is how do we secure financial sustainability to be able to support those developers who still want to volunteer, but they don't want to be paid, but maybe we can pay someone else to do the maintenance and to keep the software going and to fix all the bugs and to do the improvements that our community members are asking for that our two wonderful volunteers may not have the time to do. And on top of that, can we also that comes with the human resources as well to do the work and also to sustain our own community with maybe looking towards like more permanent funding for like a community facilitator or our wonderful admin coordinator as well to kind of keep things moving along as the rest of us are made up of volunteers. And so it's been a really hard spot to, as budgets are being slashed and we recognize that as a community we're probably on the first ones on the chopping block because the software is free, and so if they cut the community membership they still have the software and they could still use it, and it's okay, but we still like to be around for folks for another 10 years or more and to improve things. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? We've never changed our fees in 10 years, so that's something that we have to look at. Does another membership model, is that something that we have to do? And so these are all questions that we're grappling with. And I know these are questions that my colleagues at other kind of digital preservation organizations are also grappling with. And what does that mean when we're all tapping from the same resource pool? Essentially, it's like the same members who are volunteers at one or volunteers at another as well. And how do we sustain each other? How do we sustain ourselves? How do we work together more closely to be able to kind of like weather the storm, so to say?
Start with the risks and end on a more positive note. I think the risks are the pace of technical debt, infrastructure costs, and maintenance, especially for what the community is trying to define as our core modules. If that continues to outstrip our volunteer capacity and funding, there's danger that quality and reliability degrades. The project could also drift from our foundational community values if governance becomes too bogged down, or if we overtap these volunteers. These are risks of, I think, any organization, but I think we can see them in the Folio community. And that's also why we turn to the hopefulness. Coming out of the Washington, D.C. summit, there were 3 kind of white paper / activities, and then a 4th has been discussed widely at WOLFcon 25 to try to think how we leverage our governance, how we advance our development activities, how we come to funding for ongoing development, but also constantly being vigilant about our global members, our institutionally small members, how they can participate, how they benefit from shared resources. These were the values that drove the creation of Folio. They're the values that keep us sustained and excited to be participants. And I think hopefully we can keep those center of mind as we move forward.
Right. Thank you all. One last question is, what are some of the key benefits that you yourself as an individual have experienced from working within a governance group?
I think I've already sort of addressed this to some extent. It makes everyone in governance feels less alone and less uncertain about the future because members of governance help each other to govern the project, and by working together ensure that the project continues. So it helps me sleep at night, and both because I can go to bed earlier and because I don't worry as much.
Governance helps Damien sleep at night. Okay. That's awesome.
The biggest benefit is kind of learning how to practice open and honest communication within our governance group. We've gone through a massive change over the last year that we didn't expect, and being able to not only be honest with each other within the governance group, but be honest with our community about this is where we are and this is the situation that we're in, has like been able to like build trust and in ways that I didn't expect. Having our community knowing that we're telling them everything that we can tell them, and that they have the confidence in us to make the right decision for the community as a governance group, has like maybe built my own confidence in knowing that I am making the right decision. Because there are so many times during massive changes where you're like, I'm not sure if this is the best way to go. But having the community there backing you up because they can see the hard work that you're doing and the communication that you're trying to do. And even knowing that like I might not agree with the other folks on the governance group, that we can come to a consensus together and we can support and back each other up in that decision that was made, even if maybe one person got outvoted, and not kind of feel kind of bitter about that choice, being like, nope, this is what the group decided and this is where we're going to go. And so that's been a really like wonderful opportunity that I never expected to have. And so that's like something I'm going to take away with me when I eventually rotate off.
I think the first and biggest impact had on me was the international nature and being exposed to the ways of thinking, the activities of people from around the world, the consensus making of the governance group is kind of emerges. There has been some activities to try to routinize it, but there's militancy against that at times. And I love that dynamic nature of how the governance group continues to try to strive for the best possible outcomes. And the other thing, I volunteered myself, and I've learned a great deal from some staff at EBSCO about resourcing. And I think the governance groups that I've been involved with are very resource conscious. And but there's this transparency and willingness to work together. I referenced it earlier, Peter Kropotkin's mutual aid, this sense of cooperation over competition and trying to understand really what it costs infrastructurally, staffing, to put together such a massive project like Folio. It's a great learning experience for me, and one that I can actually translate back into my regular job as I manage an IT budget, and I do bring some of those thinking. I just had a small little conversation in the hall with someone from EBSCO yesterday, and I'm already thinking about how to maybe apply some of that to some of our provisioning for support going forward for some of our infrastructure in my local library.
All right. Thank you all. This is a wealth of experience from very different people from very different projects, but something I think we can all take something away from. I've been scribbling notes down while I've been dodging the small spider that's been dancing across and ended up at the tip of the microphone, much to my surprise. Sean, Elena, Damien, thank you very much. They'll be around, I think, for the rest of the day and maybe even some of tomorrow.